rules and we're recording. So if you want to go back and view this conversation, we'll make sure you have the link. But yeah, we'll go through some general reminders and ground rules. We'll introduce the city staff and electeds and we'll get started. So first, we will be recording this meeting for the members who missed the session, and closed captioning is provided. So when you speak, please enunciate clearly into your microphone to help make this work effectively. If anyone ever needs any other accommodations, just let us know. You can email us at kramer.liz@gmail.com or christyrholland@gmail.com, and we'll put that in the chat. But with that said, again, welcome to the Community Mobility Committee. And as a reminder, this is a place for residents and interested individuals to advocate for and learn about mobility and transportation issues in the city of St. Louis. Please be respectful in conversations and questions. We are grateful to have so many of you here with us today and hear from the city. And we encourage everyone participating to be respectful of the hard work and efforts, as well as all the varying opinions. Please avoid jargon and acronyms. If you are using technical transportation terms, please define it and ideally share a link in the chat. Not all of our members are familiar with this language, so we want to create an inclusive environment and a space for learning. Also, please be mindful of time. We will be encouraging more follow-up to happen outside of the CMC meetings, both through notes and also through direct answers to questions. So we hope this will help you, will help us with keeping our meetings focused and more respectful. With the chat function, please use the chat and share your questions and responses. We will be collecting these in the notes as well. With that said, we are lucky to have the partnership of the city staff, the mayor's team, and a number of our alders in our efforts. So I'm going to ask at this time that each of our city representatives give a quick introduction. Let's see who's here.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Scott Ogilvy with the City of St. Louis Planning and Urban Design Agency. I am not in my normal office today, so I apologize. I'll probably be off camera and it's a little noisy where I happen to be. Is John Kohler on the call?
We don't have John, but we do have Director Williams.
Great.
Good afternoon, Bethany Williams, Director of Streets.
And that might be it for city staff today. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I am going to drop into the chat a link or a file for the agenda for this month, and then also a file with the notes from last month. And I want to pause for a moment to see if there are any questions, concerns, or comments on those notes before we publish them later today. And they were also sent via email. Okay, so we're going to move now into our period of open comment from the public and from members. Just as a reminder to echo what Christy said, rather than having a dialogue about some of the issues that come up, we're asking members of the public or members of our committee to share their concerns, their observations, and their questions for up to 2 minutes. We will take notes and make sure we do follow up after the fact in order to keep ourselves aligned on time and to keep our discussion focused. So if you have a comment that we can follow up on, we will do that after the fact. So I want to open the floor. Jackie. Jackie.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll start by saying that this is a tough meeting today after what we've experienced this week, and traffic violence in St. Louis is quite frankly out of control. I just wanted to pause for a moment to acknowledge that and thank everybody for the work that they're doing to work on this issue. And then I did want to request that at a future meeting, we can get an update on the Mayor's Downtown Safety Initiative that was launched in September 2021. which from my understanding was supposed to be a comprehensive look at public safety, including traffic violence, and dealing with some of the motorist behaviors that we witness in downtown on a regular basis. And I'll drop a link to that initiative in the chat if anybody is curious about what I'm referring to. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Jackie. And I just want to acknowledge for folks who have not been following what happened over the weekend. There was a particularly horrific crash at 11th and St. Charles, and a 16-year-old who was visiting our city for a volleyball tournament was maimed in that crash. And we can share some news information about that as well. Patrick, I'm going to read your question from the chat. Now that Board Bill 120 has passed, do we have a timeline for the citywide plan? We will follow up about that. Board Bill 120 has not been signed by the mayor yet. It went to the mayor on the 10th. So we're anticipating we'll have more information once that has moved through to the next stage in the process.
We have another comment in the chat. It says, I have some people asking me about updates to the Brookline project. When is the expected completion date? Would you happen to know the completion date? I'm not sure that there is one right now.
Yeah, I think that's an ongoing topic, but Mike will make sure that you have the presentation that Great Rivers Greenway shared with us last month. That will also go out in the meeting minutes that covers some of the timeline of the projects that are currently underway and funded related to the Brookline.
I have a question. I don't know if it's for Scott or Director Williams. What's the status of the 7th Street streetscape? I know it had to go back to value engineering because of prices, but that's the one that's gotten federal funds 6 years ago, and there hasn't been any movement on it.
Scott,
Yeah.
if you have a quick answer, do you want to take that?
Sure. The Board of Public Service and SLDC are working on getting the project rebid. First bids came in significantly over what was budgeted to construct that project. And so there's been a pretty extensive review of the design and engineering to figure out, and the sort of bidding strategy to figure out a way to get the cost down into the existing budget so that the project can be constructed. And that's something that both those agencies are continuing to work on.
Thanks, Scott. Sam?
Sorry, I accidentally pressed the share content button, so let's stop video. Yeah, as many of you know, TrailNet does a annual crash report that we will be most likely releasing in the second week of March. I just want to put the tentative date and time on people's calendars. We're thinking to do as part of our kind of wider launch this year, doing a sort of public webinar to talk about the findings, answer questions, things like that about the crash report and just the trends we're seeing. So we're thinking potentially March 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. That is a tentative date. We'll use hopefully some of the communication channels through the CMC to promote that more. That is a week before the CMC. We wanted to do that on the week it was released, just for time purposes, and to kind of get that on everyone's radar. So we'll be releasing the report that week, and then hopefully having a public webinar where it'll be free to join. Anyone can join, ask questions. It'll be a short presentation, 10-15 minutes, and then a long time for questions. So it'll be open to basically everyone, not just CMC, not just city residents. So again, Thursday, March 16th from 6 to 7 p.m.
Great. Thank you, Sam. Any additional comments?
For those asking about the Brookline Greenway, Cheryl Williams, thank you so much for dropping the information and the link in the chat, so you can find it there.
I do want to add something which Patrick alluded to in his comment, and we've also sent via email that Board Bill 120 did pass out of the Board of Aldermen. That board bill included a number of things that the CMC has been asking for over the last few years. So we're looking forward to working with the city on seeing those things executed going forward. Okay.
Any other questions or comments? All right. So we will move forward. We do have a special guest today with us. We have Paul Hubbman, Senior Manager of Corridor and Long Range Planning at East West Gateway, here to share what's going on with the Future 64 project. I know many of you have attended that public meeting a month ago, so he's here to provide an update on that and just share some great things that's going on. Paul?
Okay, thanks. Let me get my screen shared here. All right, does that work for everybody? Okay, great. So I'm here to talk, MoDOT is really the lead on managing this process, but we've been participating with them as part of the Transportation Corridor Improvement Group in our region. And so really just kind of an update. For those of you who did attend the January public meeting, a lot of this will look pretty familiar, but right now I'll talk about what the project is right now a little later on. But for those of you who aren't familiar, a little background. So if you remember back, it's probably been a decade ago when I-64 was shut down, basically between Union and, well, quite a few miles of it, and completely reconstructed. It did not include this segment. And so a number of the structures in this area are getting old and they're coming up, they're on MoDOT's radar to replace. So there's some real need here to address this. The area we're talking about specifically is I-64. If you're in downtown, starting say at Jefferson and extending west until Kings Highway. So with context, you've got, kind of on that far eastern edge, we have a new MLS stadium, and moving further west, you've got Cortex now, which we didn't have decades ago. BJC has really grown and they're reconstructing their campus still. They're a high jobs intensity. This is an area where the highway was pushed through an existing urban context. And so it's a very complicated geography and context. There's a lot of industry here, rail yards, neighborhoods. There's just a lot going on. And so this loose diagram up on the right side of your screen, the green is our corridor that we're looking at. That's sort of our primary focus area. That surrounded in sort of that peach color is really the context area that we're looking at, because there is so much going on. It's a very intensive environment. So there's actually a third geography which extends beyond this, which is looking at sort of gross travel patterns moving north-south across the corridor, just to make sure that we were considering that as well. And as you see along the bottom underneath that, there are a host of agencies involved, some of which are on this call with us. And so it's this process that we've been moving through for quite a while. So just to touch again on MoDOT's dire need for this, these little tags are their inventory numbers for the various structures they have. Structure could be anything from a retaining wall to a bridge, and the existing conditions of those, or the ratings of those in terms of their lifespan and stability. So you've got a couple of red dots on there that are, that Grand, as you're moving east, getting off Grand, that's a pretty old facility, and the geometry doesn't meet anything like current standards. But it's also just, it's been there a long time, and its life is coming to an end. So there's also sort of this kind of spaghetti mess where Mill Creek Valley used to be, which Market Street and Forest Park Avenue both kind of slip directly on and off of I-64. There's a tremendous amount of infrastructure there. It consumes a significant amount of space. We have 2 universities right there. There's this, the world has changed a lot since this was built. But given this need for investments, MoDOT really decided to step back and look deliberately at what all is going on in this area. You know, everything from the land use developments to, you know, the brick line is a concept that wasn't even really on the books when the rest of 64 was built a decade ago. But it's one of those transformative elements that we shouldn't get in the way of as we make these massive infrastructure investments in our city. And then there are other plans. Metro has its operations and plans to work with. So the intent is to really step back, consider and include these other plans and plans like this in this effort. And so, you know, why Appel? So planning and environmental linkages, Appel, it's a process that's relatively new in federal transportation planning. Normally you would define a segment of, say, highway like this and jump right into some feasibility where you're proposing ideas right away for how to make sure that the vehicular traffic is, you know, maintained or enhanced in terms of safety and operations. But Appel pulls back and really at an early stage and a broad level looks at other, you know, context issues in the area, those development issues, of other city and regional priorities, community priorities, you know, what else is going on. And within the Appel, there are a couple of formal evaluation steps as the project team moves through options. And the evaluation criteria for those sort of evaluation points are really built around this broad array of the concerns and opportunities in the area, not just traditional transportation planning. And one of the benefits of Appel is it looks at the project, it begins to identify discrete pieces that can be implemented over time in a kind of coordinated way, but it also identifies what level of environmental analysis is necessary. So it helps overall to streamline the planning and ultimately project delivery process. So MoDOT conducted Appel a few years ago on a segment of I-70 through most of our region. I believe this is like their second or third one. Still a relatively new tool, but we're finding it very useful, particularly in these very complicated urban environments. So the process kind of looks something like this. The calendar started basically a little over a year ago. And then the initial alternatives were developed along with the evaluation criteria. There was a purpose and need statement developed, public input, public outreach. And then, you know, this project should wrap up later this spring. To the design team's true credit, they had initially anticipated being done by the end of this past calendar year. But as you get into a project like this, you know, the first third of it is very kind of discovery based. I just realized there were a lot of issues that couldn't be put to bed quickly. A lot of cooks in the kitchen. And so MoDOT's been working with them in a very seamless way to kind of extend that timeline to give it a more reasonable workflow and delivery. So I can't give you a completion date. I saw Jen Wade is on here. Jen, jump in if I'm off track in any way. But this is kind of how we are following along. So you'll notice that this effort, the blue bar on this schedule, stops before project development. Project development is after these kind of various elements of the overall project have been defined. Project development takes those and sees them through basically design and construct, or design, and then of course then construction. So moving on from there, one of the key things to a project like this is engaging with your community. I will say the engagement on this project has been really strong. So this all but the red box at the bottom here, that was basically through the first round, that first public meeting. And then I don't have the specific numbers for the January meeting. I apologize. Wasn't able to get those, but I do know that the attendance and the input was a little more than double that first meeting. So the community is paying attention. The outreach has been very strong, and the community is really engaged in this. And we've gotten quite a lot of very valuable input, not only from a lot of the core stakeholders, property owners, developers, institutions along the way, along the corridor, but the community at large. So I mentioned a purpose and need statement. That's a formal document when you get into federalized planning for infrastructure like this, whether it's a major transit investment or a highway project like this, where you really formally define what your purpose and need is for the project. And then you use that as a benchmark as you go through the rest of the planning process to go back and gut check and make sure that you are actually addressing the stated purpose and need. So safety is one of the key components of this project. This map, we had to scale down, kind of turn down the typical threshold for safety, because this entire area lit up giant red and you couldn't really determine where the problem areas were. So we had to, the entire area exceeds the state averages for like facilities. So that itself is a problem, but then that doesn't do you any good because you don't know where to begin to address the issues until you begin to calibrate accordingly. And so you'll see we have a number of over a 5-year period fatalities in the area, both on the main line and within that extended corridor area that I talked about. And a lot of accidents. So there's a lot of need and work to do here. So one of the other purpose and need elements was intuitive navigation. So probably all of you have driven this corridor. And if you're from out of town, it can be rather confusing where to get off to get where you need to go. Things don't line up sequentially. A lot of the exit ramps and access points are irregular. They're not intuitive. So are there things we can do to begin to address that as this corridor is reimagined? Mentioned that structural conditions map before, where MoDOT had highlighted the facilities they have that are in fair and poor condition. There's a baseline here to where if we do nothing, MoDOT's going to be investing north of $90 million if they were going to build this back as is and where it is, instead of trying to address some of these other. If they just replaced what's there today, they're already investing, upwards of $100 million. So with that scale of investment, we should really, it's another good reason to sort of pause and go back and really, are we defining the problem correctly, adequately? So, ideally, maybe we can reduce the number of structures. That in itself reduces MoDOT's maintenance liabilities over the longer term. I think they have over 20 structures in this segment. It's quite a bit. So there might be some solutions here that begin to tick off a number of different goals. So maintain interstate function and capacity for the future. yeah, we're not going to forget that this is an interstate pipeline and the national network. It's not just a St. Louis thoroughfare. So it needs to maintain its interstate function, and there are improvements to be made there. So we need to keep that in mind. Also, when I talked about, the context, this urban context that this highway pushed through, there is an inevitable barrier effect of the highway itself. It's not the only barrier here, though. We have rail lines, topography issues. There are a number of barriers that this is kind of aligned with in certain places that create multiple barriers. We're not going to focus significantly on that, but are there moves we can make within the planning of this corridor to really help knit back some of these jobs and communities and neighborhoods, multimodalism opportunities as we move along? So I mentioned the evaluation criteria as part of the process moving through. Those evaluation criteria are based on both needs and goals. So the needs really come out of the purpose need statement, and the goals, they are important, but they don't bear the significance or the evaluative weight as, say, the needs do. The goals are other considerations that we do our utmost to incorporate. Obviously, there are always a lot of trade-offs when you're looking at these things. Helping solve a need over here might impinge a need over there. You really have to weigh and balance a lot of things. But this is the list that was developed and is being used to screen and refine the project options as we move forward. So initially, there was sort of this brainstorming phase where I think they came up with 15 or so options to really begin to address these needs and goals. And this is kind of really, truly brainstorming. Most anything was on the table. And then all of those options were run through an evaluation process against those needs and goals that were stated on the previous slide. And then that was cooked down to a series of 3 possible corridor options. And then those are being evaluated against the screening criteria again. And then the idea is that those will be sort of knit together. Certain aspects will be pulled from one to the other. We'll refine down to a preferred alternative to move forward with into project development. So again, we're not going to pick alternative 1, alternative 2, or alternative 3. It's going to be drawing from the best, most promising options of each of them and using them to arrive at hopefully the best option to move forward. So I'm going to walk through what the 3 current options are. I'm not going to spend a tremendous, I could spend, we could spend an hour on any one of these. That's not what I'm going to do. I'll give you a link to the project website at the end. If you really want to spend time with it, I recommend you go there. So, but just to orient you, the west interchange is really the area between, say, Sarah and including the Tower Grove. This has a lot of access traffic in and out of Cortex. It's also connecting the neighborhoods on the south side into that Cortex area in the north. We have a Metrolink station there. Brick line, I think, has a big fat dashed line moving through here. They've already built a segment of the brick line at that infill station at Cortex. So there's a fair amount of job use, land use intensity, and development going on in this area. On the right side of each slide will be kind of centered around that Grand interchange, going over to Compton. And you'll see in each of these, this area, we're Forest Park and Market Street sort of slip on and off of I-64. These proposals, each one of them envisions just sorting through a lot of that, kind of eliminating it. You'll see a couple of them really focus on considering Forest Park Avenue and Market Street as sort of blending into each other at that Compton intersection. And then also, just by way of what the map key, the legend would be, the orange is off system. That means off of MoDOT system. So those are basically city streets. So anything that's orange would be a project that the city would have to lead and take over and pay for, basically. The yellow would be MoDOT on system. The sort of magenta color is additional width, basically shoulder on the highway. The geometry of this roadway does not meet current standards in a lot of aspects, and so sometimes it makes sense to kind of make improvements like that just to bring them up to standard. That really helps if there's a breakdown or an accident or something like that, to keep the highway moving as well as it can. The sort of pinkish, those are structures, and our newish structures, replaced structure perhaps. And that turquoise color is essentially bike path, bike lane, shared use path, separated facility. So on this this phase, this option 1, starting at Tower Grove Avenue, you'll see that they're proposing adding a separated bike and a shared use path along Tower Grove, crossing the highway, and then running over to Boyle and then extending north in Cortex. And a kind of an expansion of Clayton Avenue. You'll see that some of these new intersections are quite large by urban standards. You know, this Clayton Boyle intersection is now basically 6 lanes at each north and south for 3 legs of it. While that creates complexity for pedestrians and such, I mean, this is a big chubby line. The idea is that where that say bicycle, that shared use path crosses that, it would be a high visibility, high quality pedestrian bike crossing. But some of this pavement gets expansive in order to keep the traffic flowing. Remember, we've got thousands of jobs here that are all, you know, they all get off at 5 o'clock ish, and traffic does need to flow. So if it doesn't flow here, it can create backups down the pipeline on the interstate itself. That's a huge safety issue. So this option 1 for this Boyle Tower Grove is a relatively light touch compared to some of the others. Moving over to this east interchange area, you'll see this Grand and Forest Park Parkway is a huge orange intersection. Right now, it's grade separated for evaluative purposes for the math. The team selected a city option, which is to raise that intersection to at grade, because it's the most complicated in terms of modeling traffic flow and making sure that all works. So that's the option that shows up as a default on all of these options. And you know, it's definitely a strong consideration. There is a little bit of pushback, controversy about it. I think, you know, it's very much a real possibility. The reason it shows up on all of these, it's not necessarily a done deal, but the reason it shows up on all of these is simply because it's the most complicated to evaluate. And if they can make this work, then the other one, the existing condition, works well too. But you know, you're looking at 8 lanes at Forest Park at Grand in one direction and 7 on the other, and then 6 on Grand. It's a big intersection just to get traffic flowing through there at peak. So this intersection, or this interchange, basically enhances it so that your access on and off at Grand is more straightforward. You'll see this spaghetti mess of lanes and structures slipping on and off of the highway from Market and Forest Park is largely eliminated. And this doesn't even really have direct access on and off of Compton. You use either Jefferson or Grand. And that cleans up this site. It also makes it more intuitive to kind of navigate the area. Teresa extends across the interstate corridor as a community and neighborhood connector. That basically is option number one. Option two, on the west interchange, it's pretty similar to the one before. You'll see some slight differences, but again, I don't want to spend an hour and a half going over this. On the east interchange, kind of the novel idea here, there are two things on this option that are most striking, I think. One is you'll see along Grand, what's two new parallel structures containing shared use path, but this also contains dedicated bus lanes. Ignore the BRT notice on that, or note on that. We're not really talking about BRT. We're talking about dedicated bus lanes. And that really will help. The idea is that helps Metro's operations through here. You know, we've got that Grand intermodal station between bus and the light rail. And it's just a very pinched, geometrically pinched area because it's all elevated, it's all structure. And so just kind of widening that out, separating the modes into their each kind of designated space, whether it's foot, pedestrian, bike, or bus, or just the through vehicular traffic. And then there is something that's kind of covered up by a note on this, and it's actually a new dedicated bike and footpath to get you across the rail lines on Teresa south of the interstate. You'll see there's a kind of a roundabout at Bernard Street, east of Bernard Street. If you go due south from there, you'll see kind of a pinkish and turquoise line that crosses over the railroad tracks. That is a proposed bike ped structure. Moving on to alternative 3. This one takes a much stronger approach on the west interchange. You'll see a lot of new construction, not just a few added shoulders and modified ramps, but a lot of yellow, completely reconstructed highway, new structures, new bridges. The Tower Grove Bridge here is actually, the vehicles are taken off it, and it is dedicated wholly to bike ped in this proposal. And on the east interchange, you'll see some similarities to the others, but really a lot of this, the differences in these come down to access on and off the highway, and you know what the trade-offs are. So we talked about stepping out and considering things beyond just typical vehicular operations and safety and movement. So this was an evaluation of looking at improved access for underserved communities. Now these pink and blue areas on the map in the background are identified as underserved communities. And then we're looking at a 10-minute walk shed. You can see the highway kind of cuts through that darkish gray line, cuts sort of through the bottom edge of that 1-2 ped shed, and then that number 4 ped shed. And so it's looking at these options, you know, which ones really begin to help break down that interstate barrier effect for these underserved communities. Another thing that we're looking at, I've just pulled out a few examples of things that the team is looking at. But, you know, by sort of right sizing, I guess maybe is the wrong word. MoDOT staff is cringing when I say that, I'm sure. But if this highway through here is reconfigured, is there opportunity to maybe release some of that land for either development or green infrastructure or other uses. You know, MoDOT probably doesn't want to own any more land than they need to. And the city may have strong interest in additional viable redevelopment parcels in, you know, the central corridor area. Can this land be, you know, at one level, just generating tax revenues for the broader city? At just the other level, does it need to be barren, unused landscape at that sort of community asset level? So these are other things that are in the mix with the project evaluation team. So again, I just put this back in. If MoDOT were to rebuild everything as is, where is, they're already looking at nearly 100 million, $90 to $100 million of investment. So we all know that it probably doesn't make sense to rebuild everything just the way it is. So that's kind of the intent behind this whole thing. But as you move through the various alternatives and you're beginning to consider costs, you know, there's never enough money to do everything you want. So cost always has to be one of those things that is one of those sort of data inputs as you gut check and move your way through planning and design decisions. What's it going to take to really achieve the purpose and need and goals of this project? And again, the three options that are out there, it's not like we're going to pick one. So it's the aggregate of the best of the three will arrive at the preferred solution. And so this cost estimate is really just an internal evaluative tool, but these are the order of magnitude numbers that the team is really looking at. MoDOT is considering. Again, a lot of the work that would be done in this corridor is off the system. So the city is very plugged into this as well, because, you know, if you're looking at MoDOT spending $100 million just to repair their stuff, or you're looking at $214 million to get where you really want to go, a big chunk of that is, you know, going to be borne by the city, and that needs to be, what's the capacity and what's the timing and implementation strategies, and all of that is being thought through. So at this point, I will ask questions, but I would refer you also to the project website, which is down at the bottom left corner of your screen. There's a lot more information there, and you know, like I said, at this point, I think I'll just open it up for questions.
All right, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. We have about 5 minutes for questions. Mike asked, can you talk a little more about the Tower Grove Bridge, and is it possible, it being possible being a bike and walk path? I'm sorry. Let me know if you need me to say that again.
No, I think I got what you mean. The possibility of it being converted to just bike ped instead of vehicular.
Yeah.
You know, it'd be irresponsible of me to just sort of weigh in and say what I think. There's a whole team working on this, and ultimately MoDOT is the project manager and client on this. But I will say at this point, it appears to be a very viable component, but it's not something that you just do in a vacuum. So it has to be considered within everything else that can work in that area. What's the best part of the overall best mix for that area? So I think it's still in play. I can't say whether or not it's, you know, evaluating stronger or weaker than the other options in and of itself. It's really just part of the soup of what the best mix, best proposal would be for that end of the corridor.
Great. Kia asks, says that you mentioned more than once that this segment needs to maintain its freeway function. They want to know why, especially considering that another highway runs directly parallel to do this one, and whether any other more ambitious highway to boulevard style designs like we've seen in some of the peer communities were considered.
Sure. If you just look at the sheer volume of freight and vehicular traffic through here. Also, it's a MoDOT commitment to maintain this as part of the interstate system, which is a national system. So if you were to consider eliminating this as interstate, I think that's a whole other host of players. It's true, 44 is parallel at this segment to 64, but 44 also has its own volume, and where are you diverting all of that traffic, and at what impact to those communities would you be inflicting? So I also think that maybe if I'm thinking of interstate to boulevard conversion, this probably isn't a natural candidate simply because of the other barriers that already exist there, like the rail yards and all that industrial use and the topography. So even if that were, something that were interesting, I don't know that it would be a very viable option for this particular segment.
Great. We have time for about one more question. But the other questions that are in the chat, we do see those and we'll get them over to Paul so we can all follow up with you. The last question is, at what point will MoDOT consider a Pell for 70 and 55?
That's a question I can't answer.
All right.
So before I end, though, I want to just mention two other things briefly. So just unrelated to the I-64 Pell, but probably of interest to this group. We are, through our Great Streets Initiative at East West, in partnership with MoDOT, going to be looking at an arterial assessment of the entire arterial network in the Missouri side of our region. The idea there is to develop some relevant design considerations for a lot of these urban arterials. MoDOT has a lot of arterial infrastructure in our region, and their design guidance is really born from rural highway design. And so the district staff in our St. Louis district has been hungry for some documented alternative design considerations for these urban contexts that will help them move forward as they plan and develop projects on these roads in these communities. It won't be kind of an atlas that says do this here. What it'll do is it'll break down the network into a topology based on context, and context includes, what are the other land uses? Does the community have its own specific priorities and goals, and all these other sorts of things to bring to bear when you're working in those projects. The other thing I wanted to mention was that Anna Musial and others on our staff at East West, we were recently awarded a Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, federal grant through the IIJA, to develop a safety plan for the region, identifying your kind of high need areas, and what it will do is align us and make any municipality or county or anyone in the region eligible for Safe Streets and Roads for All implementation dollars over the subsequent years of our 5-year infrastructure bill. So it'll do two things. It'll identify those hotspots and some strategies to address them, but it'll also make them eligible for federal funding to actually implement. So stay tuned on those two fronts.
Stay tuned. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for the update. That was great. And I can't wait to have a smoother flow.
All right.
Great. Thanks again, Paul, for being here. So we're going to do some subcommittee updates, just some quick updates, and I'm going to share this. I'm going to give the update for the engagement committee on behalf of Don Walter, who's not able to be here today. So the engagement subcommittee will meet on March 1st to review applications for new voting members for the CMC. So if you wanted to be considered and you have not submitted an application, including if you've submitted an application in the past, you can still do so. The link is in the chat. And then I also want to remind folks, most everyone who's on here is already in our Google group. And if you're here and you want to be in the Google group and you emailed us today, we will get you on the list. But we have a Google group, which we do most of our communication through. That's the best way to find out about events and to be plugged into things that are happening across the St. Louis region. So I put the link in the chat. And then as a reminder, last month we shared some information about posting guidelines. So other folks can post, but there are some expectations we ask for that. So I'm going to go through these subcommittees in order and just ask for a very brief update, including when your next planned meeting is, if you have one coming up. Rachel, are you here?
I'm here. Our next meeting is going to be on the 28th at 11 o'clock via Zoom. If you're interested, just reach out to me, rachel@southbrand.org. and I can assist with that. We had some great meetings with the Streets Department and Board of Public Service to get their input on, educating us on what we need to be looking at. And also, I will be meeting with President Green on the 28th to discuss some line items with her. One thing that was brought up that's really interesting about asset management software and how we can really look at our roads on what roads are in the worst condition and how we prioritize. So I'm going to bring that up. And also a big topic we've been talking about for a long time with this group is the hiring of a transportation planner. So those are two big line items I'm going to be talking with her about. So stay tuned. And if you're interested to learn more what we're working on the Safe Streets, join us on the 28th at 11 o'clock.
Great, thank you. Bryce.
Hi, folks. I have no updates at this time. Still sort of trying to reformulate the role of the traffic calming subcommittee, given the state of the traffic calming guide. Our next meeting, though, if anybody has any ideas or wants to collaborate, will be next Tuesday, February 28th at 10 a.m. if you want to talk more.
Great, thanks, Bryce. Jackie, are you still on and want to give a quick update?
Yeah, I'm on, and I'll give a very brief update. But yeah, Micromobility Committee is somewhat on pause. Sorry if you can hear my son in the background. He came home sick today, but the city is re-releasing micromobility devices in every neighborhood under a new operating permit to hopefully better manage some of the crowded sidewalks and some overplacing of scooters and micromobility devices in certain neighborhoods. So that we worked with the city on updating that permit. And we're in the process of drafting a statement of support for the new guidance of the program that hopefully we can get approval from the entire Community Mobility Committee to release as the program gets relaunched in every neighborhood. Contact info is up there if you're interested in getting involved, not having regular meetings right now, but potentially looking to serve as an advisory role as the program continues.
Thanks, Jackie. And then Sam.
Hey everyone, similar to the Micromobility Committee, the Open Streets Subcommittee will continue to be on hold. We met and kind of discussed the sustainability of it, and with just declining people joining those meetings, and also just the lack of momentum around ownership of any type of open streets program. We didn't think it was sustainable to continue meeting. We will, however, though, if anyone is interested, there were a lot of great open streets types events last year and this year, the one on Washington Avenue and the one on Delmar with the Ice Festival. So there are a lot of great open streets opportunities out there in the city of St. Louis. And personally, I think the city of St. Louis has great opportunity for other smaller open streets events. And so we'll be continuing to advocate for those and make sure they're well planned. So if anyone wants to, join that charge with me and get in the ears of those people who do plan those events to make them better, feel free to email me, sam@trailnet.org.
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Our next meeting, the CMC, is March 22nd from 1 to 2 p.m. So we'll send out more information about that soon. I'm also putting back in the chat, if you didn't see from Cheryl earlier, information about providing input on the North Connector for the Brickline Greenway, also on the 28th. It's a big day in transportation. And then a reminder that TrailNet is planning to do a crash report release on Thursday, the 16th from 6 to 7 p.m. And we'll share more information about that soon.
The webinar is that day.
Webinar.
The report will be released earlier in the week.
Okay, the webinar is going to be that day. And voting members, we will be in touch with you about a couple of things in the next few days. So please check out your email. And the rest of you, thank you all so much. Please be safe outside, both on the streets and also in this impending storm. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Okay, hello.